with education and research, youth and culture. So the cultural and creative industries hold significant social, economic, and cultural value, playing a critical role in shaping the regional development. And they contribute not only to economic development and employment, but also to preserve cultural identity and heritage, strengthening the social tissue and fostering diversity. And these elements actually provide the rationale for the EU's engagement in the sector in DG International Partnership. So the EU has a very long history of cultural cooperation on the African continent, as manifested through several large regional programs like the Pro Cultura program and the EU ACP Culture program that you might be familiar with, and that amongst others support entrepreneurship, building of skills and access to financing. There is furthermore the CreatiFI program of 20 million euros, which is a blending initiative aimed at leveraging impact investments in the CCIs across African, Caribbean, and Pacific countries. And the main objectives are to improve access to finance, to strengthen local financial systems, and to enhance market access by increasing the business capacities of different creative subsectors. So recognizing the need for tailored solutions and country context, CreatiFI offers financing through 3 complementary access streams implemented by Proparco, the World Bank, that is combining country work with complementary global knowledge products of the sector, and the African Development Bank, which support the fashion industry through fashionomics. So CREA Fund is one of the 3 axes of CreatiFI. And it's under this framework that the study has been undertaken. And I'm very happy to open this webinar on the main findings from the study that provides us with a snapshot of initiatives and gives an illustration of what success might look like in practice. So understanding the key ingredients of attainment is essential, of course, to inform policymaking and actions, but also to attract investments. So I think we are now all very keen to listen to the findings. So back to you, Ludivine. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Annica. So maybe I will give a few insights on Proparco and CREA Fund briefly to introduce what is the background of this market study. So briefly, Proparco is a French development financial institution. It's a subsidiary of the Agence Française de Développement Group, which focuses specifically on private sector development. So we promote sustainable economic, social, and environmental development for more than 45 years. We support businesses and financial institutions in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the Middle East. And we logically focus on key development sectors, infrastructure, renewable energy, agribusiness of financial institutions, health or education, and more recently on cultural and creative industries, thanks to this program and this funding from the European Union. So CREA Fund stands for Creative Enterprise Action Fund. It's a facility composed of 1 guarantee, first of 5 million to help our client, financial intermediaries, investment funds, to support their investment in a business opportunity in the area of cultural and creative industries. And there is also a technical assistance component to also maybe help those financial intermediaries remove some obstacles to investment with partner funds or bank to bring them support to, I don't know, design a dedicated strategy or identify appropriate pipelines or conduct due diligence that integrate the specificities of cultural and creative industry. So by doing so, we started working with a couple of market studies to also inform those investors' decision-making process. And so we launched this study last year jointly with Marie-Laura Mungai from Restless Global and Tom Fleming. So both of them will now present the main results of this study.
Thank you, Ludivine. So I'll take it from here. So we've talked a little bit about why this study, but let me go over it briefly again. So basically, before we started, the first project that we endeavored within the CREA Fund initiative was to do a needs assessment from financiers and creative companies. So we spoke to a lot of financiers, a lot of funds that were clients of Proparco, to ask them why they're maybe not doing more in the creative industries. And we found from them a very big need for models and benchmarks of success in the creative industries. So really what they told us is, we don't actually know what a successful creative company look like, so we don't really know what to look for. So there was a need that emerged for a framework to evaluate prospect creative companies and guide investment decisions. We also thought that this framework would be very useful for entrepreneurs themselves to learn from previous examples of success and emulate previous efforts. So that's the context of this particular study. So when we started, we had to lay down the groundwork in terms of our approach and the methodology. So very importantly, we had to define the criteria for success, because there are many ways to define success. Then we identified successful creative companies in Africa and other emerging markets. So to understand how we organized, so the study was done with PwC Nigeria. I have several members of the team here today, including Kester, who's helping us run this webinar. And we reached out to Tom Fleming and his company to help us with the studies in other emerging markets. And I was mostly focused on creative successes in Africa. So we did a long list, and then we reached out, we did a pre-selection, and we reached out to founders, and we documented the trajectory of these companies. So through a mix of in-depth interviews with the founders when they were available, that was the case for the creative companies in Africa, and desk research, that's mostly for emerging markets. And then from these trajectories, we identified and analyzed their key factors of success and also key challenges. And in the end, we developed a framework that compiles all of this into an easily understandable document to help investors and entrepreneurs assess their own opportunities. So the first question is how we defined success in the creative industries. So in the end, we selected companies based on the following criteria. Before I go through this, I have to remind everyone that this was done, again, in the context of CREA Fund, and CREA Fund has its own criteria itself. CREA Fund is accessible to funds clients of Proparco that want to invest in creative sector companies in Africa, also in the Caribbean, actually, but that excludes North Africa and South Africa. So we tried to follow this as a criteria, although we also highlighted some companies outside of these regions, of course. So we first looked for companies that were making at least 1 million in annual revenue in dollars. This already shortens the list quite a bit. There are not so many companies in the creative sector in Africa that reach this benchmark. That was an important one. And then we looked at companies that were either backed by private capital and had an exit, or backed by any kind of funding, private capital, debt, or self-funded, but who were profitable and had become a market or category leaders. So they could either have had an exit or have become a category leader and profitable and sustainable. So these were our criteria for the study. So this led us to this. So these are the studies, these are the companies in Africa that we studied in detail. So I'll just list them briefly in case you cannot see the screen. So there's Afrique, music distribution from South Africa, Chocolate City, music and entertainment from Nigeria, Christy Brown, a fashion label from Ghana, Film House Group, a film exhibition, distribution and production group from Nigeria, Kana TV, which is in the broadcast space in Ethiopia, Landmark Africa, which does entertainment infrastructure in Nigeria, Marodi TV, a content production company in Senegal, Maving Records, music label in Nigeria, Ndundo, music streaming in Kenya, Rock Studio, content production in Nigeria, Triggerfish Studios, animation production, South Africa, and Vivo Fashion Group in the fashion space in Kenya. So these are the companies that we studied in details. You can see on this chart here a bit of an idea of their size and whether or not they have raised funds. I'm not going to go into this in detail, but you will have access to all this, of course, into the full study after this. So don't worry about that. Then I bring in Tom. So Tom, you can tell us a little bit also how you came up with this list that I'm showing now for other emerging markets.
Thank you, Marie, and good morning, everybody. So we had the challenge of trying to find a sample that would be meaningful and comparable to the African context. And we, as with Marie, we use the same metrics as much as possible, and also tried to get a diversity in terms of sectors and in terms of geography. And also, I think, in terms of founder stories. So we have developed 10 case studies, which will be, you can see in detail in the report when you get to read it. Again, for those who can't see the screen very easily, the first is Abraham and Thakore, which is in India, a fashion label. Afabrica, which is a Brazilian content production company, working across different types of digital content. The third is Grow Commerce, which is an Indonesian brand aggregator working across mostly fashion and textiles through e-commerce and retail, through physical retail. An Indian company called Kama Ayurveda, now I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that, but they focus on beauty and wellness. A Colombian company also in the beauty and wellness sector, Lotto del Sur. A Vietnamese cinema chain called Megastar. A fashion and e-commerce company called Moderniza in Turkey, OPO, which is a fashion label in Egypt, and again, obviously in Africa, but not in sub-Saharan Africa, so I think eligible as a comparator. Ninth is Pocket Aces, which is an Indian social media content production company. And then 10th is another Vietnamese company, VNG Corporation, which focuses across digital content and gaming. Marie.
Thank you, Tom. So for those who are following closely, I think you can already notice that the profile of the companies are a bit different between the two. So in Africa, if you look at the title here, it's mostly industries in music, film, and fashion, right? Whereas in other emerging markets, you've heard Tom describe them, there's a lot more digital content in e-commerce. So that should already tell you something. We're going to get into that in more detail. So this is what the detailed case studies look like, and that you will see when you will be able to download the study. So basically, there's a part about the story. We go deep into the revenue models, the different pivots that all companies have to go through, their fundraising, if they had any, the challenges and key drivers. There's some quotes from all of the founders. So this is what you'll be able to access. So now what we want to focus on today really is the key learnings. So there was a lot of learnings from these studies. There are learnings that are specific to each company, of course, but we really try to extract the ones that were making sense across the board to really give, as I said before, guidance. So the first one is that we found that in Africa, and I'm taking the approach of talking in priority about African companies, and Tom will join me to give context on the emerging market companies. So we found that really there was a very large proportion of successful companies that had founders with global exposure. So either they were Africans from the diaspora, they had studied or worked elsewhere, or they were foreigners. There was also quite a number of foreigners. So we found that they were, so these successful founders were most likely to have this international experience. So that often meant better business and communication skills, a wider network, that is very useful for access to markets and fundraising. So this was the case for many creative sector companies in Africa. I can list, for example, Filmhouse, the founders studied in the UK, Rock Studio, Jason Joku, the founder, studied in the UK, Kana TV. There was a mix of Ethiopians and one American. Marodi TV, the founder studied in France. Afrique, the founder is French, but established in South Africa for a long time. And Dundo, the founder, is Danish. So that really happened quite a bit. The situation was different in other emerging markets. So Tom, it would be great to hear from you here.
Yeah. That's true. And just on that as well, I think that there's something, I'm not sure whether it's a good thing or not, but there's something that validates the investment proposition for those who have those international connections. It kind of gives investor confidence. It's not just the networks, it's also the sense that they have a robust model because of the connections they've made across the wider ecosystem. I do think that's still the case is the case with the global comparators in other regions, but perhaps slightly less so. Partly because of the different geographies. So if you're in Southeast Asia, the connections or the links back into Europe and North America are less developed, perhaps. So there's more homegrown talent, or their regional connections are more in those regions as opposed to in Europe and North America. I think also that there's a lot greater maturity in the higher education and skills sector in some of the countries that we focused on, which I think helps to bootstrap talent into the marketplace quicker without having to go outside of the country for education and to build those connections quite so much. So there is still the need to build global connections. There is still the need to connect with both in terms of value chains and chains. But actually, there's much more of the onshoring of knowledge, perhaps, in a lot of the countries we looked at, particularly in Southeast Asia.
Thank you. So the next key learnings is that longevity is the winner here. So really, when we look at the success stories in Africa, most of them, if not all of them, are actually successful businesses that are more than 10 years old. So this is quite a long time. This is really the time that it took them to take off and to establish this business. And it's explained by the lack of infrastructure, which means that companies need, and I'm sure all the entrepreneurs that are on the call with us today will really recognize this issue. Companies need to be involved at every step of the value chain in order to do what they want to do, even if what they want to do is at the bottom end of the value chain. You cannot rely on the infrastructure existing, so you have to build it yourself. So one key learning from this is that on the African continent, investors should really look at a long time frame for creative sector companies that are longer than maybe the typical time frame than a fund would have. So we're estimating 10 to 15 years just from what we've said. But I want to put a caveat here, and we'll talk about this more later. We are looking now. So this study was made on companies that are currently successful according to the criteria that we established. But a lot of things are changing at the moment, both from the access to finance, a lot of support programs being launched today, including CREA Fund, and also, of course, the AI disruption. So the learnings that we're presenting to you today are based on this first cohort of successful companies. But in general, I do think that this idea of longevity is a key driver of success in the creative space. What about in other emerging markets, though?
Yeah, I think that there is a common theme globally, and I think it probably points to the still emergent investment landscape for the creative industries as well, is that investor confidence seems to need to see a track record over a long period of time to give it the confidence to invest in creative companies. What we saw, I think, in a lot of the examples in other parts of the world is a lot of companies that started off almost analog, as retail or as production companies in different sectors, and then they pivoted into things like e-commerce and became quite hybrid in terms of a digital and analog mix. But they were able to scale up through that blend, and partly that points to the size of the domestic markets, the robustness of the IP frameworks, and also I think that the proving their concept by being able to work analog and then being able to pivot digitally. And grow that kind of e-commerce, and then quite hybrid models overall. But they do still have that founder story that goes back quite a long way. What we have seen, though, I think, is it points to this kind of hockey stick concept around growth, is that some of them did have a model which was proven in an old economy, and then suddenly we were able to accelerate and grow very, very quickly, facilitated by investment. So that I think is perhaps slightly different to the African context, where there's more of a kind of plateau, or the graph is a little bit flatter, building the business over a longer period of time.
Yes, thank you for this. And so we'll move to the third key learning, which is that on the African continent, the profile, the nature of the companies that are successful leans more towards small and medium enterprise than a tech-focused startup. So really, as we were looking for successful companies, we found that they are more likely to have traditional business models. They're in majority SMEs which have not yet fully digitalized. So think of a music label or a film production company or a fashion label. These are really traditional businesses which may use technology. We'll talk more about that later as well, but that are not tech-centric. And actually, there is extremely few native creative tech startups on the continent. You might already know all of them. We can talk about that later as well. We did not include those startups in our creative success stories. Why? Because they have raised money but have not yet had an exit. So we can mention, for example, Carry First in South Africa in the gaming space, or Wowzy in Kenya in the creator economy space. These are startups that have raised funds. I mean, Carry First even raised, I think, up to 60 million now, but they are, they've raised fund and have not provided an exit, so they didn't meet our criteria. So the key learning here from this element is that the most appropriate tool to finance creative startups in Africa might not be venture capital, if the venture capital model is the traditional one that we see for tech startups. So that's something that is key, and that's something that leads us to suggest that really new ways of investing are necessary for the creative space, that are not only venture capital. So it can be things like micro PE, can be debt. If you have questions about that, we can go into more detail. The situation is a bit different, as Tom has already started talking in other emerging markets, and we saw that there were more digital content and e-commerce startups. So can you tell us more about that, Tom, please?
Yeah, I think venture capital is more common in the creative industry sector in other emerging markets, but it's still a very nascent proposition for most creative firms, and particularly for those tech startups. And it does raise a question around how you create a hybrid investment landscape, as is required in the African context. What we saw perhaps we almost redefine notions of startups. We saw a lot of legacy businesses that were undertaking multiple pivots as the marketplace shifted and as the investment landscape shifted. So in a sense, they become kind of constant startups. And zigzagging in terms of their strategic positioning and the market development activities that take place. So we saw, for example, companies that started off as online gaming that became working across multiple verticals in different types of content, moving into screen-based activities, moving into digital marketing, moving into a whole range of different activities, and raising funds and exiting along the way. And actually changing the very nature of the business from their founder story to what they became. And a classic example is VNG Media in Vietnam, which started as an online gaming company and now is co-owned by Singaporean and Chinese media companies, and they work across multiple digital content areas. So I think the story is mixed, but certainly the VC landscape is more mature. And I think that speaks as well to the IP frameworks that they have and the level of enforcement they have in those countries, as well as the kind of businesses that are coming through.
So we'll continue a bit on that theme, because the fourth key learning is the incomplete digital transition that we're seeing in the creative space in Africa. So I already mentioned that a little bit, but that really represents both a challenge and an opportunity. So at the moment, most of the creative companies that we've seen only make a small use of new technologies, typically, let's say, for distribution or social media marketing, maybe a bit for processes, but they have not yet fully digitalized or fully embraced new technologies. Of course, we are in the midst of a major AI revolution that has not yet been absorbed and is not yet being leveraged. I think this is not only the case in Africa, it's the case everywhere. But so this is going to change a lot of things. But obviously, this provides an opportunity for the creative space, because being able to fully leverage these technologies could significantly enhance everything from production to production quality, distribution, marketing, market expansion. So this is the moment we're in, and this is an opportunity both for entrepreneurs and investors. Tom, what about in your markets?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. One is where there's investment in digital, it's often through, or in the cases we've developed around, certainly around fashion, it's often through businesses that can pivot to e-commerce platforms. And I think that points to perhaps a different retail and distribution landscape in some of those countries, where just being able to get the product to the customer is relatively seamless, which obviously makes e-commerce a much more viable proposition, although that's obviously shifting a lot in sub-Saharan Africa, but perhaps they were ahead of the curve in some of those other regions. There's also, I think, perhaps something here around the hunger for investors at a regional level to invest in local content. So yes, you do have your Netflixes, etc., looking at local content in countries like Vietnam, Indonesia, Turkey, etc. But you also have aggregator companies and investors that are looking to scale up their content production that is onshore. So there are regional and or local companies that are investing in the production of local stories, local content. So it's onshoring for longer, and perhaps has deeper market roots in some of those countries than is currently the case in sub-Saharan Africa. And I think that raises questions around how to retain IP and value within Africa when investment comes looking for new content.
Yeah, and we'll talk more about that in a bit as well. So sorry, now I don't have the mysterious reveal of our sections, but so the fifth key learning is the diversification of revenue streams in Africa. So very often we hear investors give this feedback to companies that you're focusing on too many things at once. You have to focus on one, otherwise you'll lose focus. We find that in the creative industries, actually, there's a lot of diversification of revenue streams, and this is really needed because entrepreneurs are operating in environments that are really volatile. And so having several revenue streams mitigates all sorts of risks from economic and political volatility, but also regulatory environments that can switch, also consumer tastes that are still being shaped, and also you have to try a lot of things before you find what works, right? So we found that really having a multiple source of revenue makes the companies a lot more resilient, and that is one of the key aspects that have made the companies that we profiled sustainable over time. Of course, there's also, it's so important to open new markets. We are in markets that are very small in terms of, purchasing power, or sometimes in terms of potential customers. So there's a necessity to go that route, which maybe contradicts, some of the basic advice that very often we would give a company. But there's a reason for that diversification. Tom.
Yeah, I think this is there's a global commonality here, and I think it reflects the reality of being a creative enterprise. So if you're a micro creative business, you tend to be a portfolio business. That's your instinct, but it's also a market necessity for your survival. And as you scale up, there's a continuum there. And I think it's just natural that creative businesses do generate different revenue streams because they're interdisciplinary, and they also are also looking for resilience. And perhaps there's an investor readiness question here, which is investors are not necessarily familiar with that reality. and that actually that reality generates a robustness and a resilience that without it, these businesses would be less investable. I mean, that's something that we need to build awareness of across the globe, perhaps from an investment perspective. I think there's also something you mentioned about opening up new markets as well, is that different markets require different approaches, whether it's around diversifying revenue streams or whether it's around diversifying the very nature of the content and the brand proposition. And we saw certain businesses such as one of the example from Turkey that is moving very much into the Gulf market, particularly Saudi Arabia. And actually, that's a different aesthetic. It's a different media context. It's a different market overall. So they have to pivot and generate diversity in their business model in order to grow those opportunities.
Thank you. And I think we have a nice transition here to the importance of foreign sales. So this is really key. So as I mentioned, the domestic markets in Africa are very often very small with limited local spending power. There's the whole IP infringement issue, which we'll talk more about in a second, and macroeconomic issues. So for example, at the moment, you're all very much aware that several countries have gone through, big devaluations of their currencies, and this is a challenge. So in order to strengthen the business of a creative company on the continent, it is quite important to be able to generate foreign sales very quickly. And that's also can be counterintuitive to developed markets. People operating on emerging markets like Africa are quite aware of this. So that means practically that regional or global expansion might be necessary quicker than you would have initially imagined, and that servicing or exporting to foreign markets is often part of a sustainable growth strategy. So actually we'll have a very nice example of this when we talk with Jean-Michel about Triggerfish, where really the servicing business, so in their case, really producing high-end animation for partners outside of the continent as a service company is what has also really enabled them to grow. Jean-Michel will explain us how they leverage that. But so that's often really part of a sustainable growth strategy, and that should be done in parallel to building your local market. The local market might take a while to become profitable, but you might be able to be profitable much quicker if you're able to do foreign sales in foreign currency. So that's a key point to note as well, especially in our current macroeconomic situation. Tom, over to you.
Yeah, and I think it points back to an earlier point that you made, Marie, around how in African and other contexts that those businesses, those founders that have those global connections, whether they're educated abroad or whether they just built those global networks, they tend to be more scalable and more investable. And maybe that's because they have that global literacy. They kind of are born global as companies, or at least born regional. And I think that generates a different worldview, and which obviously will facilitate different approaches to business development and creating products and services that are relevant to different marketplaces. Certainly that international literacy is quite commonplace in other contexts in which we looked at, whether it's Loto del Sur in Colombia, which is a beauty company that looks at the Latin American market, but also then globally at the Spanish-speaking market, or whether we look at Modernisa in Turkey, which looks at a modest fashion market, which obviously is growing as a global proposition in fashion and textiles and related sectors. So you have to be born global. You have to develop that international literacy, I think, as a key factor for investment readiness. And that's, I think, coming through a lot in the businesses that we looked at.
So another very interesting point that we discovered in the study is that I would say all, except maybe one or two, success stories in Africa are actually self-made successes. So what I mean by that is that the companies that reach that level in our cohort are companies that actually several of them did not raise external funding, and very few were supported by official scheme. And actually, the one that was supported is Triggerfish, that we'll hear about, because they were lucky enough to be in South Africa where there was such a scheme. Because for everyone else, for the past 10 years, there was almost nothing, almost no support, and actually no access to funding. So that means that all of the companies that you're seeing in our report, the African companies, have been able to reach that level of success really on their own. So it's mostly self-funding. Keep in mind that these are companies that are growing without even access to a normal bank loan, because the banking sector does not understand this model of companies yet. It's really changing as we speak, so I don't think it will continue like that. But that means that you have to grow your business really on your own resources. I mean, it can appear really surprising, but really companies like Chocolate City or Marodi TV or Christy Brown, they've really just have been self-funded, maybe with one prize, one tiny grant here and there, but that has been their journey. So what's important here is that, as I've mentioned before, we are not yet seeing in this cohort, in this study, the impact of all the recent creative industries support schemes that are being launched. So the companies that you will see here are the ones who are successful today, but they have not yet been able to access any of the new funding that has been announced, any of the new schemes that you might have heard of. So we are hopeful and confident that maybe if in 5 years we do another study, the profile of the companies will be very different, and hopefully they'll be able to reach the level of these companies much faster, because they'll have access to a lot more support and a lot more understanding also from the investment community. What is the situation in other emerging markets, Tom?
I think there's a couple of points of differentiation. One is that perhaps some of the countries that we focused on, such as Indonesia, such as Turkey, there's a probably slightly longer history of having a mixed economy approach to investment in the creative industry. So historically more grants, perhaps greater appetite from retail banks to get involved in creative businesses. Perhaps there's also perhaps a slight difference in the attractiveness of those kind of origin or founder story aspects that you get in creative industries businesses, where there's a lot of hero worshipping going on. I think certainly in sub-Saharan Africa, the founder is the business kind of narrative, which is inevitable when you're self-funding and you have to put yourself out there and sacrifice so much to get to a certain point. But whereas certainly in the Southeast Asian context, which we looked at, it's harder to find the founder story. There's much more about the overall IP that the business is generating and their track record. So they managed to sort of dilute the narrative of the business, so that the people are still key, the stories are still vital, but actually they're not the only defining aspect that the investors are looking at. I think that's a slight difference between perhaps the African context and some of the other countries we looked at. But really the situation is still similar. There is so many self-made successes who've just put themselves out there, and families and friends are still the first investors for so many businesses in the creative industries, wherever you are.
So we mentioned IP challenges quite a few times. Again, that's something that is very well known in the space, that won't surprise anyone. But just to go over why this is a problem. So really the fact that there's so much piracy and ineffective or non-existent even copyright collections. So this touches mostly sectors like music and film. The impact of this from an investment perspective is that it really undercuts the potential revenue that a company can make from its IP. And so it's then in consequence can limit investors' interest, because let's say if we're in an environment where 50% of the potential revenue is lost to piracy and lack of copyright collection, which can be the case, it's not a crazy number, then you can imagine that you're trying to raise funds on a company that's only achieving 50% of its potential. So that has a very big impact on growth and on fundraising. So we also have another issue, which is it gets a bit technical. Happy to go more in detail on the questions if you want. But in the non-existent securitization of IP, that limits access to finance. So here you have to understand the difference between valuing IP to maybe get a loan and securitizing IP. So IP doesn't have an inherent value unless there is a buyer for that IP. That's something that very often is misunderstood on the continent. However, if it is an IP that has value because it has sources of revenue that are tied to it, so that can work, for example, a catalog of an artist that we already know is generating X amount through streaming every year, then you can turn that into a security that you can then take a loan on. Is getting technical. We can get into that in more detail later if you want. But basically, this system doesn't yet exist in Africa. It's tied to more generally, really a lack of awareness from everyone, including IP holders themselves, on the entire process, very often because they know that they can't collect revenue based on their IP. They don't even register their productions. So collective management organizations, which are the institutions that are supposed to be registering everybody's creative creations, and typically music and film, and then go and collect the rights of people who use them and then redistribute, don't even have access to the data. So this is really a very big challenge. So far, the companies that we're seeing that are successful despite of that, right? They are still able to build sustainable business models, basically with only a fraction of the money that they should be making. And that comes at a huge cost for them. So just to give one example, Film House Group, for example, which is in distribution, exhibition, and production of film content in Nigeria, they spend an enormous amount of time and resources and money to go and track down, the films when they're being pirated, and shut the pirates down and fight them in court. So this is unfortunately the environment that we're in. And Tom, I think that's probably one of the key differences also with other emerging markets where there's better regulation and piracy and literacy.
Yeah, I think that's a key thing. We're starting with the IP literacy, that there's just a greater awareness of IP and how to manage IP. I think the word manage is really key here as well. It's people often talk about protecting IP, but it's just understanding how you unlock your IP as a resource, how you articulate it, and how you embed it in your business, and how you translate that into something that might be investable. I think that's really key. So building that IP literacy from a creatives perspective, and obviously from a market perspective in terms of consumer behavior, from a policy and regulatory perspective in terms of having good IP frameworks. And it's a bit patchy. Some of the countries have good IP frameworks, but there's very little enforcement. Some of them have relatively good enforcement, but the frameworks aren't so strong. It depends on a range of factors, and there's a lot of obviously fragility and turbulence in other countries as well. But the IP literacy tends to be more embedded in the marketplace than in some of the countries that we've obviously focused on in Africa. I also think that this goes back to a point around having diverse revenue streams, in that to be resilient, you're not just trying to leverage your IP in a kind of pure sense. You're not banking on a hit. You're a service provider, you're a brand, you're cutting across different revenue streams through what you see as your IP, but actually it's a kind of polymorphous process of building a brand and telling stories. I think we see that a lot. And then finally, in some of the really scalable and the older businesses and the businesses that attracted more investment in those other marketplaces, they were also businesses that had infrastructure. So that in Vietnam, there's VNG, sorry, not VNG, sorry, what was the other one? Megastar, which also was building cinemas. So they were managing the distribution and the presentation and distribution of IP as well, and that was a key part of being able to onshore IP production from Vietnamese talent. So they were trying to boost, through the support of cultural policy in Vietnam, the development of the domestic film industry by managing the distribution through cinema. If we take OPO in Egypt, focus on women's wear, they also have factories. They make stuff. So they have that. So it's not, you're not just investing in the IP, you're investing in the ability to produce and also to distribute. So that I guess having that range of different sources of revenue generation, which obviously makes you more investable for different kinds of investors as well.
Mm-hmm. So now I'll talk about the two last point together because they're linked. So what we found as well, which is also something that people are aware, is that at the moment we're missing opportunities for exits on the continent, which means that the only few exits that we have are exits to strategic foreign investors. So if we look at the companies that had proper exits among our cohort, they really have been through first an investment and then an exit to strategic, such as Canal Plus, Universal Music. So Canal Plus is for Marodi and CanaTV. Universal is for Maven, and Warner Music is for Afrique. So that the most prominent exits have been to global strategics, actually the only exits, and they're really motivated by the global company's desire to build market share in a new market, which is Africa, right? So that can be a challenge for impact investors. That can be a challenge for entrepreneurs who are concerned about keeping the IP on the African continent, because then that means that, of course, the ownership transfers to the foreign entity and the IP ceases to be African. So this might or might not be a concern depending on your investment strategy. If you're an investor or if you're an entrepreneur, you might just be very happy with this type of exit. However, I think that there's a global concern that is widely shared on the continent over the need to build local champions and to really strengthen the local investment community and to build companies that are big enough to be able to attract investment and become sustainable on their own without being part of a global foreign group. And I would say that this is linked to number 10, which is that, again, because there's so few potential exits, these exits that happen then are in fact premature, because sometimes companies find themselves in a situation where there's no other source of money. So I can mention Marodi in Senegal, Africa, or in South Africa, both struggling to raise other kind of financing besides the strategic financing, which means that they are not able to spend more time to develop their business independently, and they bring in their future acquirer very early. That leads to really a reduction of value creation for the company and limited value generation in general for the ecosystem. So that is the situation today. That's an opportunity for local investors to come in, and banks as well, and support these companies for longer so that we can maximize the value creation. Tom, how does that relate to the rest of the world?
Yeah, I think that this is a more acute challenge, perhaps in Africa than we've seen in other parts of the world. Although it is still a persistent issue in any emergent market. I think perhaps one point to make is, or 2 points to make. One is that government tends to be more hands-on in lots of other countries, and that isn't always a good thing. But there's a lot more kind of state investment or public-private partnership, particularly I mentioned the cinema example in Vietnam. So that obviously brings with it investment, and it changes the kind of shape of the deal, if you like. And then the other point to make, which I think is really relevant to the African context, is the growth of regional investment. So companies that are looking to invest in content which are based in a region, and they're looking to, in a sense, onshore at a regional level that value and to support businesses to thrive. Without it being from another region, which tends to be the model in sub-Saharan Africa, with companies coming from North America and Europe, perhaps more so. So if we take the example of Fabrica, an audiovisual company in Brazil, they essentially had got investment and were fundamentally exited through investment through Banijay Americas, which is working to develop the media ecosystem in Latin America and Caribbean. So although it's an outside acquisition, it's at least onshoring the value at a regional level and keeping it relatively local. So I think that's another point for consideration, is around how you mature that regional investment landscape in Africa.
Thank you, Tom. So these are our 10 key learnings from these 22 case studies that we've done across Africa and other emerging markets. I would like now to welcome to the presentation Jean-Michel Koenig from Triggerfish. If we can if we can open the mic for Jean-Michel, who should be, I can see him. Here you go. Hi, Jean-Michel. Caster, can you open his mic, please?
All right. Thank you very much, Marie. Jean, can you just raise your hand so that I can identify you?
He's here with his video on, so you should be able to see him. I can see you, but I cannot turn your mic on. Let me see.
Sorry, give me a second. Sorry, John, can you just raise your hand? I'm trying to, okay, we got that. Thank you. All right, so you can unmute yourself now. We can't still hear you.
I think you have to do Control Shift something. You might have the same issue. I had the same issue with my mic when we did the test. How can we solve this? Can you try to come out and come back in? Perhaps, I don't know if this will help. In the meantime, as we wait for you, I will just talk about the assessment framework. Okay, we'll wait for Jean-Michel to come back. After everything that we've discussed, all the different case studies, all the key learnings that you'll find in the study, really the study ends with this assessment framework, which I mentioned before. So, okay, here it is. Yeah. My presentation's all over the place. All right, so this is what it looks like. So I don't expect you to be able to read it here, but you will have it in the full document. So really, we took as a basis all the key learnings that we've told you, and we've broken them down and in a variety of some questions that you can ask yourself. You can ask about your companies, you can ask about your own business, give yourself a grade and see how you're faring on each of these key aspects of the business, and see where you are compared to where you should be in your business. So that's in the study as well. And so I'm hoping that Jean-Michel can come back.
I'm here.
You're here and we can hear you.
Hi, Marie.
Wonderful. So now I don't see your video anymore, but I hear your voice. Okay, you're here. Perfect. Great. Thank you so much, first of all, for making yourself available to talk about your business. So I've just put up a slide that is the most beautiful slide of our presentation because it shows some of your best known work. So for the people who don't know Triggerfish yet, could you give us a quick intro as to what you guys are doing?
Hi, everyone. So I'm one of the partners and the finance director of Triggerfish Animation. So we are a South African-based animation studio. It was originally a stop motion company way back in the day, and from there it moved to a CG studio, and somewhere we accidentally got into making our first movie, Adventures in Zambezia, which was a godsend because we were never very good at advertising work. And from Zambezia, we kind of established ourselves as a long-form animation studio, and then built a business around producing premium content for the world. Animation's quite expensive, so right off the bat, we had to think about creating films and movies that would sell internationally. So we've been doing this for a long time now, and we've established ourselves in the industry, and we've over time been fortunate enough to build quite a few partnerships.
Thank you. So yes, you can see on the screen some of the most well-known Triggerfish productions, and some of you might recognize Quasimodo, which was done with Disney, and is, has kind of revolutionized what we consider African animation. Super Team 4 with Netflix, Stick Mine with the BBC, Kia and the Kimoja Heroes. This is with Disney Junior, if I'm correct.
No, yes, yes, it is.
And so really, really big things. So you mentioned already, so what I find super interesting in the trajectory of Triggerfish is the number. So first of all, people should know that this is a 30-year-old company, right? So it really speaks to the point about really being able to stand the test of time to find a sustainable business model. And one of the things that I really find very interesting about your trajectory is that you guys had to pivot, or had to at least adapt your business several times over these 30 years. You already mentioned that it started as stop motion for advertising, and then you went into full-length feature film animation. Can you tell us a bit more about some of the other pivots that you had to do, and specifically how you started considering production service work, which I know was not an easy decision for you guys to get into, and what that did for your business?
Yeah, so we were able to make our first two movies, Zambezi and Kumba, back to back. And what happened is, after Kumba, the film industry is a brutal place, and you've kind of released two movies and everyone thinks you're doing extremely well, but we had nothing lined up after Kumba. So we had we had to let everybody go. It was quite a dark time for us. And that 1 year before we booted the company up again, we realized that we were missing a development piece in our company. We were not working on enough original IP to go from project to project with, it was project-based financing where you're ramping up and then you're ramping down, which can be quite exhausting. We were then fortunate to work with Magic Light Pictures based in the UK, and we provided animation services on the BBC short films that they showed on Christmas Day. So I think the first one was Stickman, and then we did The Highway Rat. Then we did The Revolting Rhymes Part 1 and 2, which got nominated for an Oscar in the short film category. And we did The Snail and the Whale, and all of them kind of, they won a lot of awards, and they did establish us creatively in many ways, but that was pure service work. So these IPs don't belong to us. They are, Magic Light has rights to produce, they're based on the written works of Julia Donaldson, who's a well-known children's author. But at the same, what this did do is really, keep our, it helped us boot up our company. And at the same time, we were able to establish our development company, and we started working on our own IP. And what we found, the team that we put in place in development, in Triggerfish development, were able to originate our third movie, SEAL Team, but we also generated a lot of IP, which we sold on to partners. So about half our business comes from original IP that we created, but we sold to partners. So we internally generated our own service work. So we could, and that's how, Quasimodo came to life. Disney were interested in the production and were happy to finance it, but, consequently you sell your IP. It's not a first prize, but what it does do is, it brings in revenue for the company, it brings in experience, and it also, helps us establish partnerships with these studios.
Thank you. And we'll talk about what the next step is for you. But just before that, one of the things that you've done very well, and that's directly under your docket, is financial management of the company. And I'd like you to tell us a bit more about this, especially since this is really investment focused. But if you can tell us what was the journey financially of Triggerfish, what funding you were able to access, what you were not able to access, and then how you're doing today.
The film industry is very volatile. I don't know. It's a little bit like venture capital. Most films lose money. Then there are some films that break even, and then you get what the industry calls hits. These are movies that cover the costs of all your failures. I think, you know, my background was in film finance before I moved back to Cape Town and met my business partners. So I'm well aware of the risk profile of making movies. I think, you know, as the CFO, you know, I don't want to go bankrupt, simply put. So I know we're working in a very volatile industry. So knowing this, I'm especially cautious. And, you know, I always like to kind of ring fence our funding. I always like to have a 2-3 year financial plan that, you know, letting people go is never easy. And I really felt that on Kumba. And, you know, I hope that we never find ourselves in that position again. So you're always looking to plan ahead. At the time of Zambezi and Kumba, and for some of SEAL Team, we were able to access the film tax credit. So that's many countries have generous film incentives available for TV and film productions. So that helped close about 20% of the budgets of the movies, a little bit less for SEAL Team. And the film tax credits do attract productions to the country, even for the service work. I'm personally not a fan of them because it's you know, what you're happening is I feel it's a race to the bottom. Every country tries to outdo each other with more generous film tax credits. And what it does do is it distorts the market, but it is what it is. So you know, they do exist and you've got to work with it. We also, the NFEF and other institutions and the Department of Trade and Industry did kickstart our company, the development company, so that you know, this grant money, especially in Triggerfish development, because, you know, out of that first cohort of work we did in originating IP, we got Super Team 4 and Kia out of that. So from 10 IPs, we managed to get 2 shows into production, which I think is quite remarkable. And I track a metric in the business of how much money we spend on development to how much revenue it drives. And I think we're tracking for every $1 we spend on development, we bring in $6 in revenue. I think we're a very efficient small studio and you know, we don't do a spray and pray type approach with IP. We very cautious and we think about where do we want to, on what IPs we want to develop, how can we bring them to market, and we've done quite well with that.
Thank you. And that's really a model for a lot of content-based companies on the continent. Not everyone has, you know, actually a CFO. So we can see here really the difference that it makes. So we don't have so much time for questions. So I still have one question to ask you, but I want to ask people on the chat to prepare their own questions. We will be able to take 4 or 5 live questions. So if you want to ask a live questions, you have that little hand on top. You can raise it and then Kester will unmute your mic and take your question. If we have time, we'll then go to the questions on the chat. If some of you want to stay a bit longer, we can maybe extend the time a little bit. I'm available. But so prepare your question. And as you're preparing your question, Jean-Michel, the last question that I want to ask you is, you mentioned yourself kind of the good and the bad of that service work strategy, which means that you the good is that you became sustainable, you had solid revenue and you were able to grow. The bad is that you are not in control of your own IP or the work that you created. And I know that that's now what you're focused on fixing. So if you can tell us a little bit more about that next step for Triggerfish.
Thanks, Marie. a successful studio is like a three-legged stool. You know, you want the production in place, you want the financing in place, and you want the distribution in place. I would say at the moment we have the production in place. We've been working traditionally on project-based financing, but we're working on a more permanent financing solution now. The problem with selling, an analogy for giving up your IP is like you raise this child and then you give it up for adoption, and it hurts, because you know the challenge with service work and selling your IP is you're on a hamster wheel, either looking for someone else's blessing or coming up with another great idea which you give away. Eventually you run out of ideas or you just end up exhausted. I think what you really want to do is hang on to your IP, and in the film industry, when you find that successful IP, you can then double down on it and monetize that IP and get to the more valuable stream of income, which is regular and repetitive on that IP, which without having to do that work for a one-off fee. So it's really improving the quality of your earnings. And that's where the upside in the creative space is. It's in that regular repetitive revenue that's based on valuable IP that you can repeatedly monetize. And then around that, you can build a brand enterprise around licensing and merchandising, sequels. You know, if you look at all these successful film studios, you know, they have several successful IPs. You look at the Minions, Ice Age, Shrek, all of them are based on characters that people love, and that's what you want to find. So, and that's the business we're in, is we, you know, we want to keep making movies, and in that we want to find those characters that people really respond to and build a business around that.
Thank you, Jean-Michel, and thank you for sharing your journey. Stay with us in case some of the questions are for you. And I think there are some. So, but first, let's see if we have live questions. So please raise your little digital hand so that Castor can see it and give you the mic.
All right.
We have many people here, so I don't know if you're seeing them all, Castor.
All right. Thank you so much, Marie. So at the moment we have David, Paul, and Kate. So I think David will go first. So you could just kindly introduce yourself and then ask your question. You mention who the question is directed, but particularly so that the person can give you a response. Thank you. So David, over to you. You can unmute your mic.
Thank you very much, Kester. Hi, everyone. My name is David. I run a creative economy media company called Communicate. And my question is directed at Jean-Michel. I hope I got the pronunciation correctly. So you just talked about how a lot of your success or your early success came from striking international partnerships. I mean, some of them you had to sell your IP for. So my question for you is, how did you approach those conversations? What kinds of questions did you have to ask your partners and ask yourself? And what kind of questions did you have to answer? I hope that is clear.
Thanks, David. It's a lot. I think when you're dealing with an organization like Disney, there's a lot of checks and balances. Certainly we had at the point we had done Kazazimoto, we had 3 movies behind us, and we had contact with Disney at that point through our networking and through the profile that we had established for ourselves. Actually the super team force, same with Netflix, they even want to check out the physical facility, the infrastructure, our security protocols. There is endless due diligence questions that they make you fill, answers that you have to give. So it's a lot of work to get to the point to be ready to work with those kind of partners. You get there by proving yourself on your own productions and establishing your network. It's not easy, but when you can get there, they want you to be successful. I think that of both Disney and Netflix, they are not. The great thing with these partners is they're never going to walk away or abandon your production. It doesn't matter what challenge you're going to face in the production, and every single production has its challenges, but they will work with you to solve the problems. I mean, the Kazazimoto, we outsourced the work to studios around the world. We had multiple currencies. there were 10 individual shows that we produced. I don't think we'll ever, I think that's the high point of complexity we will ever see in our company. I don't see anything more complicated than that production, but it taught us so much.
Thank you, Jean-Michel, and thank you, David.
Thank you very much.
We'll move to the next question, wherever it is. I can't see myself,
Okay,
but I'm sure Kester,
so
you're on top of it.
next up we have Kate. Hello, Kate. You can speak now. You can speak now. Thank you very much. Just unmute yourself. Hello, Kate. Can you hear us? You can tap on that microphone icon on your screen. Okay.
Then move to the next one if this person doesn't.
Dr. Maka, can you hear us?
Okay, Kate is saying in the chat that it's disabled.
Yes, I can hear you.
Kate, you could just drop your question in the chat to pick it up from there. Dr. Maka.
Good day. I'm Dr. Tsepo Maka, medical doctor, tent producer of animation content with my daughter at Keblo Studios based in Johannesburg, South Africa. Congratulations to Triggerfish. We have worked with them on on one or two things helping us grow in our studio. I have a question for you, Jean. Of the IPs that I've seen you having produced, I haven't seen any merchandising and licensing. Is there any reason why you didn't do that, or are you still working on that one IP where the people will love the character and then you look into licensing and merchandising? Thank you.
Thanks. That's exactly the answer. You really can only invest in licensing and merchandising once you've already established the success of the IP. I went to a brand licensing fair once, and they said that you're ready to do licensing deals when somebody phones you wanting it. So I think the challenge, particularly, we create original content. So these IPs that we bring to the market are not established. And if you think of the time cycle that it takes to bring a movie into the theater, you cannot find partners to invest in the production of toys until they know how a movie is going to respond. And on original IP, that's particularly challenging because you actually don't know how the movie will be received in the marketplace. So it certainly is in our plan to do licensing and merchandising, but you want to build that around something that already has a proven success.
Thank you, Jean-Michel. Can we go back to Kate's question, which you put in the chat? Let me see if I can access. Sorry, Kate, I'm trying to see.
Okay, so I have a question here for Kate's question. I think it's what are some of the structures or initiatives you observed in the comparable markets, that's Asia and Latin America, that promotes the monetization of IP assets? So Mary, I think, Tom rather.
Okay, that's a killer question. I think the short answer is that there's lots of initiatives, although it's quite patchy and it depends on which country. I think that there's certainly a stronger policy environment, and as a consequence, perhaps an enabling environment for the creative industries. And I'm speaking very broadly here, but that's what we see in most of the countries that we focused on. Of course, we focused on countries where we thought that was the case, because intuitively we expected there to be more businesses that had grown because of that support landscape. So there's something about policy working in partnership with the private sector to herald and to champion the creative industries, period. I think that's common in all of the countries at different points in their recent history. And then there's how that's actioned. So obviously there's the regulatory context, there's the IP frameworks and their constant renewal, working in partnership with the creative industries. If you look at Brazil, that's had a bit of a stop-start, depending on who's in power. But more recently, they're renewing their overall approach to IP. There's a big debates, as there are everywhere, around what does AI do to the IP landscape for creative industries, but let's not get into that today. But they're currently refreshing their overall IP framework, and they have a national action plan and strategy for IP, and then that trickles down in terms of the business support and the investment landscape. So if you take Brazil, again, they have a very strong and diverse approach to business support enabled by state agencies. One is called SEBRAE, which is a business support program or agency that has a really strong creative industries dimension to it. They tend to work with startups and micro enterprises, but then they do facilitate up the food chain in terms of supporting higher growth businesses, and then that gets passed on to different parts of the government infrastructure. So I just think that the point to make is that there's more coherent and connected and longer term strategic approaches to IP development, underpinned by national strategy for creative industries, underpinned by data as well. So a lot of these countries have undertaken a lot of heavy lifting in terms of understanding the profile and the dynamics of the creative industry sector. And then that obviously generates understanding of who's out there, what their development needs are, what their IP context is, and you can then develop tailored schemes as a consequence. That's happening a lot in Indonesia, for example, where there's a department of creative industries coming out of government that's working on those kinds of areas. There's also a lot of initiatives that are trying to bring the creative industries closer to the money, so through incentives that are linked to IP-intensive businesses, and also those kind of incentives that Jean-Michel talked about, which we all have a love-hate relationship with them, but looking at tax rebates, looking at co-investment, co-production agreements to incentivize international investment in IP-rich businesses in each country. There's a lot of that going on in all of the countries that we looked at. But I think there are also some challenges in the IP context as well, which are worth mentioning in some of those countries, which are relevant in some of the African countries. And one of them is around freedom of expression and diversity of cultural expressions and censorship, and the extent to which that becomes a hurdle for building rich and innovative creative enterprises, first of all, and then obviously attracting investment with state sponsorship in creative enterprises. So I think that is also on the table as an issue and a challenge in many of those countries that we looked at, obviously Turkey, Vietnam, being examples of countries with very strong governments for which IP is managed through censorship as much as it is through businesses having their own self-determination.
Thank you, Tom, for your take at this killer question indeed. Kester, who's next in the...
So we have Paul. Paul, you can unmute yourself.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes, perfect. Thank you. This has been quite a treasure trove of learning. My name is Paul Atwine. I'm the founder of a startup in Rwanda. I work in the sports and the creative industries. So for me, at least based on what you've shared in the case studies, companies that have been around for 10 to 15 years tend to be the safe bet. And they have actually done a lot of bootstrapping and strengthening their IP in-house. So my question to Michael, I hope I've got it all. Is it Jean-Michel? I don't know how to.
Jean-Michel.
Is Jean-Michel? Yes. Is how do you value? What are the best how would one value their IP from the beginning they start and build on it? What are those kind of milestones or key considerations that you would consider that by the time they are coming to the table with someone willing to buy for it, they've already done their due diligence over a period of time and put systems and processes? And then lastly, what are those things that you feel are not going to change over the next 10 years that creative companies can build solutions around?
Thanks, Paul. I would say that for a creative company, and if I think about the success that we found, and I often wonder why is that, and there is a big element of what I call good fortune, but right from the word go with Zambezia, which was made on a very modest budget, we really pushed the quality as far as we could take it. And the quality on our second movie, Kumba, was even was about double that of our first movie, Zambezia, again on a very modest budget. You know, what those movies did for us was establish us as being able to produce quality content that can go for global theatrical distribution. So all those long hours, all that effort and the energy that we put into creating those movies paid off, because people looked at those films, and when they heard about the budget we made them on, they were shocked. So I would say for, you know, I don't know, you know, I can speak to the film industry, but I would imagine for any creative industry, you've got to know how you're going to get to your market, but quality matters, I think, in creative industries. You know, the work that, you know, anything you put together, people are going to see it and they're going to form an opinion on it. And you know, this is your business card. This is how you're going to build your network and get your name out there as a company. I think that, you know, for us, the challenge in the film space is that because of the expensive nature of animation, you know, our big disadvantage is that we can't look to our home market or even to our home continent to generate revenues to cover the costs of production. Whereas, you know, if you take, you know, Japan, a Miyazaki movie can do $400 million at the box office in Japan alone. He doesn't have to care about how the rest of the world is going to respond to his movies. They do travel very well, but he can build a production company that can easily survive in its own market. You know, there is no chance that us as a production company could survive if we only look to South Africa as our market, and not even the continent. You know, it's only responsible for about 5% of our revenues, even less than that. So the upside to that is that it forced us to think global right from the get-go. And if we're going to do animation and we want to sell it to the world, quality is imperative.
Thanks, Jean-Michel. And Paul had another interesting question that I think we can maybe all take a try at. It was, what are the things that are not going to change? And Paul, I don't know if you were referring to the current changes that we're actually undergoing, because of course, I mean, Jean-Michel, we haven't put you on the spot yet of talking about AI, but when animation is concerned, that's going to change a lot of things, especially workflow, budgets, and all of this. So, I mean, I do believe that the point you just made. Yes. I was just going to say that the point that Jean-Michel just made on, quality, I think that will stand, the test of time. But Paul, yes, go ahead if you have more to add to your question.
Yeah, no, this is just something, again, that I listened from a lecture, Jeff Bezos, and he said in terms of Amazon, when he was planning 10 years, he knew that at least when 10 years pass, people still want fast delivery. People still want discounts. No one's going to come and tell him, oh, I think I should be paying more. So he focused on those, like the way the stool approach, there are those three things he focused on when he was building, that he knew that over this period of time, over the next 10 years, these are definitely not going to change. So with the creative industries, I just wanted to understand, what are those things? Of course, you've already touched on quality, but what are some of those other things that are definitely going to change that you can design your business model around, and at least you know that long term, this will work as you keep adjusting to the AI and all the things that come in over the next 10 years.
Yes, it's a famous quote indeed, but I think you're very correct in thinking in that way, in the world that we're living in, and we have no way to predict the future, but I think this is a good guideline. So I don't know if Jean-Michel, you have your own take on that, on what is not going to change, especially in your industry that is going to change a lot by all.
Yeah, I think
indication.
Being trustworthy as a company and reliable, if you think of someone at Disney or Netflix making a decision to spend millions of dollars with your company on a production, the last thing they want to do is go to their boss and say it didn't work out. So, in the film industry, relationships really matter. You want them to say that was an amazing decision to work with this unknown company in Africa. Well done. So I think we're just very conscious of what those relationships mean to us. And, it's both an advantage and a disadvantage that we are here in South Africa. An advantage is that we're not in Hollywood, but that's also the disadvantage because, we have to be constantly building relationships. And the film industry and those people with the green light power, there's only 40, 50 of them, and they're moving around constantly. And you want to build those relationships because if somebody's at Netflix today, they might be at another studio tomorrow. What they will know is the experience of working with us, and we want that experience to be amazing. And we want them to pick up the phone and speak to us about what projects we're working on to see, in order to develop that relationship and to bring more of our films to the market.
I think that's another good point. So you mentioned quality in whatever you do with whatever new tools are there, but really looking for, the highest quality that you can possibly achieve, and then building these relationships of trust over the years. I think, Jean-Michel, this applies to any business, and even more so in Africa, where sometimes we can't rely on functioning, business environment or courts or whatever. So really your reputation weighs a lot, and I would say reputation and also excellence in management of your business and also financial management, which again is one of the key factors of success of Triggerfish. I think you're correct. These things are things that will continue, Paul, whatever happens in the future. So thank you for that. I think that was good. Okay, we are officially 1 minute past the time. It looks like you're still more than 100 people here. Do people still want to ask a couple questions? I want to say for those who need to leave, maybe Ludivine or Mirabel, you can let people know where they can find the study.
Sure. Yeah, we already shared the link in the conversation section. However, maybe we will share by email to the registered participants all the documents we were relating to. I'd like to, well, Mary, you want to take a few more questions, or?
I don't know. Are they pressing
Yes.
questions? I haven't been tracking. Yeah. So Kester, tell us.
Yes. So we have 3 more hands, so we can wrap up with those.
Okay.
Anyone else who has like a couple of questions could just drop it in the chat, and Bo can take these last 3 ones here. So we have Christine, who is up next. Hello, Christine.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay. I'm Christine Githiomi, and I'm founder for Beaumont, a strategic management consultancy, and we're launching a culture and creative business accelerator. So this conversation is so helpful for us, and I'm so glad I didn't miss this. And my question is, in terms of, based on your findings, you've illustrated specific areas such as digital transformation, revenue diversification, and legal IP support. But I'm asking for your recommendations, either Marie or Tom, about what should an accelerator such as ours prioritize to maximize the growth potential for creative enterprises. And just the second part to the question, are there any, did you come away with any recurring recommendations from the founders that you interviewed about what they wished they would have known, or what would have been a really great intervention while they were building all these businesses from scratch? And maybe Jean-Michel might have some insights here about what they would have appreciated in terms of support while they were growing their businesses. And thanks to everybody, Marie, Tom, your teams, and CREA Fund for this report.
Thank you, Christine. I'll take a crack at that. First of all, congratulations on launching an accelerator. There's definitely more need for support. So one key aspect that we really focused on, because this is what CREA Fund is meant to do, is facilitate access to funding. Right. So as we've said in the key learnings, the companies that are successful today have had almost zero access to external structured funding from outside, and had to figure out a way on their own. The reason they didn't have access to funding, there's several reasons for that. One is that it was not really available. The investors themselves were not sensitized, were not aware of these businesses or how they worked. This is becoming a lot better now. I mean, this initiative by Proparco is a clear indication that, on the investor side, there's now much better awareness. There's a lot of large development finance institutions that are now aware, and they know how to go about in financing the creative industries. However, we find that it is still very rare, exceedingly rare, to find companies in the creative sectors and entrepreneurs that are not even just investment ready, that are business ready. Okay, so that's even before investment ready. So that's why an initiative like yourself can be important, because the success stories that we profiled are people who became business ready and investment ready, or are today. I mean, of course, you hear from Jean-Michel, and he's extremely experienced, and that's one of the key reasons why he's the one speaking to you today. But there's almost no company like that on the continent with that level of understanding of what the business is, of a proper team, of proper business planning and financial management. So I would say for an accelerator, that's the key thing that needs to be fixed, is how do you get creative companies from where they are today to, I'm not even talking about investment ready, to business ready. So they need to understand the basics of business management, of financing. They need to build teams that are, proper teams where it's not just the founder, CEO / creative director doing everything. You heard from Jean-Michel, who is the CFO. You can see exactly today the value that such a person brings to a creative business. So this is what you can play a role in. Yes, Tom.
Yeah, I just want to echo that, and just, I think, make the point, and a similar point, and I don't think you make it enough, is that if you're developing an accelerator, then the fundamental question is, where is a pre-accelerator? Because we've seen this in lots of countries where an accelerator will have the pipeline for a short period of time. There will be some investment ready and business ready enterprises that can succeed in an accelerator. But by its very definition, they have to be really tight businesses. So it's about how you build a community in the ecosystem or the pipeline, so that you're building that business readiness at a pre-accelerator level to be able to then furnish the accelerator, because otherwise it'll be a short-term accelerator. So I guess that's the critical design challenge that you face.
Yeah, and actually I will add also that because it's a topic that is very close to my heart, trying to really raise the capacity of creative enterprises so that they can grow and eventually raise money or become sustainable. Not everybody needs to raise money. You can also completely just be profitable on your own. But it's I would love to see more people with skills that are outside the creative industries come join this industry. So business managers, digital strategists, accountants, who will then partner with people in the creative space to make their teams strong. So I don't know who's still here on this call, if there are people who are not core creatives, but this is really something that we need to encourage, to build, well-rounded teams. And this is what happened in the tech space in Africa 15 years ago, right? When the tech space started, there was just one founder person with whatever their skills were, and now you find proper teams. So this is really a transition that needs to happen.
Thank you, everyone. Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you, Christine. So, okay,
Thank
quickly
you,
with, do we still have a couple of questions?
Yes, we have,
I see there's
2
tons
more.
of talk in the chat, so
Yes,
can't
2 more
keep
hands
track
up.
of.
We have Izzy. Hello, Izzy. You have the mic now.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. My name is Izzy. I'm a practicing filmmaker and a growing academic with very profound interest in research. I had one question that I didn't get Marie or Tom talking about. When you profile the businesses that you had, the 10 from the continent and the other ones from the other regions, did you come across or did you profile any business that had met the CREA Fund criteria but has folded up or is currently struggling and about to fold up?
I'm sure. I mean, you mean so businesses that had reached $1 million in annual revenue, so who had folded up, so you mean who didn't have an exit, well, then it doesn't meet the criteria, right? Because the criteria was either a business that had that had an exit or was a sustainable market leader and profitable. So I'm sorry, can you explain your question further?
I'm just looking at the basis of the research that you introduced, which was there was a criteria that every company had to meet to qualify to be profiled.
There was, well, 2 criteria, right?
I think maybe I can jump in here. Essentially, we were looking as much as possible for success stories. But I can tell you, we would have been a lot easier to look for failures.
Yes,
or that were struggling. Each of the businesses we selected, there were some, as with any business, there were some structural challenges that, I think one of the things that we certainly identified is that they're all trying to transition. They're running faster. They're running fast to often stand still in such a shifting technological marketplace, often in quite fragile contexts. I mean, there's also there's a succession challenge, perhaps particularly in some of the African case studies, is that the founder stories are really compelling. They're driven by brilliant people, and they're building fantastic teams, but there's still a structural fragility in terms of what happens if these people walk away or get run over by proverbial bus or whatever. So I think that those are things we found, but fundamentally we were looking for success stories as much as possible. That would be an interesting counter study.
That answers my question. If the focus was on success stories, then it's okay. Thank you.
Yeah. That's why it's called success stories. Easy. But yeah, no, there's a lot that struggle, obviously. But I think Tom, that's a very good point that you made, that there is this question of who will take these companies over after the initial founder, and these are still businesses that are extremely tied to the personality, and specific talents of the founders, and that's a challenge. That's a weakness for the industry. All right. Do we have? I don't know, Kester, you're keeping track of the questions. Are we?
Yes, so we have one more hand up.
One more, okay.
Tizomo. Hello, Tizomo. Hello, can you hear us? Good morning. Hello, Tizomo, can you hear us? You can just unmute yourself, or maybe just drop typing your questions in the chat.
My mic is on mute. I don't know if they can unmic themselves.
So I guess I can just pick on, can call on Osahon Akpata as the last person to speak. Tizomo can drop a question or type in the question in the chat. Hello, Osahon. Good morning.
Good morning. Hi, my name is Osahon Akpata. Let me just turn on my camera. All right, great. I'm Osahon Akpata, and I'm head of Canex Creations Incorporated, which is a subsidiary within Afrique Bank that does investments in intellectual property across the creative industries, life sciences, and technology. Thanks for the presentation on Triggerfish. It was good to learn so much about the case. I'm interested to know, because animation is something that we have come across a few deals on, and I'm interested to know about this potential for export. So, the good thing about animation is that you can voice over in any language, and you can go into all these different markets. But what I see from your cases, into cases of adventures in Zambezia and even Kumba, your first couple of projects, you went as far as to even get voice actors from Hollywood. And even with that, there's still challenges of, you know, getting to high numbers in terms of 100 million, 200 million in the box office or however it was released. So I'm interested to know, what is the answer that you see for being able to get this original IP that you create to the point where it can do 3, 4, 5x the budget that you put into it? If you're going as far as to get even voice actors from Hollywood and you're getting some level of distribution in these other markets, how then does one cross the barrier? Because it's something that we collectively have to do on the continent. Thanks.
If I knew that it would all be solved, I think that the answer to that is the film industry is like a poker game. It's really important that you stay at the table. If you put all your bets too early and lose money, you're off the table and you never stand a chance of winning. What you want to do is you want to stay at the table, play your hand, and remain there, and then the winning hand will come to you. No one knows how a movie is going to do. I think it's impossible to predict success, including in the animation space. Animation is very robust. It's a family product. You know, people still like to take their kids to the theater. It travels very well. So our movies are dubbed into many languages. So the countries individually can own it by putting their own celebrities and voice over actors into the film. Getting Hollywood celebrities helps to make your film stand out from the crowd. But what lands to get a global hit is a $1 million question. No one knows that. What you do have to do is keep making films and keep getting better at filmmaking and finding the creative talent. And I like to look at it that creativity is evenly distributed. So Africa has as many talented creatives as any other part of the world, but it's the route to market and the opportunity, finding the opportunity, which is a challenge, is what we're hoping to fix over the long term, that the best creators on the continent would come to us with their ideas and we would bring that to market. But we just have to keep doing what we're doing. I don't think we've seen an African originated IP break out on the global stage yet. We've seen Wakanda, which was a Disney product. I think you saw District 9, a live action movie, but that was financed from overseas. What we're hoping to do at Triggerfish is to build the platform to find just that. But it takes time and we have to keep going. There's no shortcut.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jean-Michel and Osahon. And I would like to say also for those on the call that do not have the expertise or experience or reach as Triggerfish yet, AI can now dub all of your content in all the languages for free, right? So in terms of exporting, it's become a lot easier. Of course, it's a whole other ballgame to get Hollywood stars to voice your film, but you can still start somewhere and have your content travel. All right, we've gone way over time.
Yes.
So I think, are we done with the live questions, Kester?
Yes, we're done with the live questions. I think I'll just pick on Tizomu's question from the chat.
Okay.
He's saying, are there any frameworks or considerations that support younger founders and younger creative companies?
So that's a question that's a bit out of the topic of our study, right? We were really focused on success stories with a bent towards investment of these companies. I don't know, Ludivine, if you want to talk a bit more about the different solutions offered by AFD Group in general, because there's a lot that AFD Group is doing.
Yes, and that's also related to the questions on trainings that was somewhere in the chat. So thank you all for all your contribution and this discussion. Unfortunately, we might not be able to reply to all the questions, but we'll share some documents that hopefully will give you some answers, at least partially. So yes, on the training and maybe younger entrepreneurs, there are several programs undergoing with AFD, the Agence Française de Développement, which work with public counterparts on the regulation, the framework environment, the governance, and the creative infrastructure in several countries across Africa in particular. So I share the link in the chat about their latest activity report, where you can find some examples of project of incubation, for example, which allows some entrepreneurs to benefit from mentorship or certain support to help their ideas and concept become maybe profitable in the future. There are also some initiatives to support training environments in Senegal. I know that Triggerfish also works on capacity building and training programs in the animation sector to also help local talent grow and get diversified and get better exposure. So yeah, there are a lot of things undergoing. I think that this session is a good example of how much we can work on, we can exchange on and capitalize. And this is part also of one of CREA Fund objective is to generate data, examples, stories that can be shared to a greater audience, and so that we can learn from each other, from your experiences, bad or good, hopefully good, but we can also learn from the less successful experiments. So we will share everything. Again, I would like to give a big thank you to Jean-Michel for his time. Thank you, Jean-Michel, to, of course, our experts, Mary and Tom, and for their work on this market study, to Kester and PwC Nigeria for their supporting work in the CREA Fund implementation, and also, of course, to the European Union, which make it possible through the CreatiFI program. So thank you to each of you for your participation, even at this very late hour, and have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.